Luka Doncic got traded. There are now rumors about Morant from the Grizzlies that he could be traded. If all that's happening, then the Pelicans should just trade Zion Williamson, right? I'll explain why it's similar, but also different in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Thursday. We're back. I'm feeling a little bit better. Again, I apologize for the missed shows. Forgive me if I'm coughing or anything like that throughout the show here. Still struggling a little bit. But I want to get into this topic today because I find this pretty interesting. Luka Doncic got traded. There's now rumors that Morant could be on the move. Pelicans should just trade Zion if that's the case, right? Yes and no, and I'll explain why. This is going to be a pretty collective bargaining agreement, CBA heavy show, at least for the first part. But it should shed some light on just what the heck is happening in the NBA right now. The drama is dialed up to 11 here. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason here, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, and comment down below. It helps the show. Say hi. Just let me know how things are going. Are you excited for Mardi Gras? What's your favorite Mardi Gras parade? So let's get into this one. Oh, sorry. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, I'm out of practice, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Free money right there. So let's get into this one. WTF is going on in the NBA? Basically, what you're seeing with the Luka Doncic trade, with the rumors about Morant, and we'll get into those in a second here, is the perils of the supermax or max contracts right now. We actually saw this a good bit with Brandon Ingram. Because of the way the new collective bargaining agreement works with what's called the first apron and second apron, I'll get into those in a second here. If you aren't a max contract guy, teams do not want to give you a max deal. Brandon Ingram wanted a max contract. Would have been 25 to 30% of the salary cap depending. And no one wanted to give that to him. That would have been $52 million per year annually. He's getting $40 million annually. If you're not a max guy, then teams absolutely do not want to give you a max deal. Previous collective bargaining agreements, they absolutely would have. You would have just handed Brandon Ingram a max deal and you would have figured it out later because it wasn't really punitive to the teams. You could just do it. You trade him, you'd figure it out, or you just pay the guy, whatever, and so on and so forth. You just go deeper into the luxury tax if that's where you were. But now, under the new CBA, the new collective bargaining agreement, basically a high salaried roster really limits what you can do. So you've heard the way it's kind of tiered, right? There's cap space teams, then you go over the cap. And then from that over the cap space, there's room until you get to the luxury tax. And then from the luxury tax, there's room till you get to the first apron. And then from there, you get into the second apron. And I want to focus on those aprons really quickly here. Basically, what those do is they limit the type of transactions that you can make. If you're a first apron team, salary and trades need to equal. They need to be equal. While they generally need to be equal for non-apron teams, you can bring in 125% of outgoing salary. So if you're trading away a $10 million player, you could bring in a guy making $12.5 million. Here, it's got to be like for like, 10 million for 10 million, essentially. Teams also can't acquire players in a sign-and-trade deal. So basically, if you wanted to sign someone, you're in the first apron. It's like, we'll just do it with a sign-and-trade since we can't sign them with cap space. You're not allowed to do that. You also can't sign buyout players if their previous salary was more than $12 million, let's say. And the only flexibility you have in the offseason is second-round draft picks, first-round draft picks, or a $5 mid-level, or sorry, $5 million mid-level exception. It makes it pretty difficult to try and get things done. It gets worse if you're in the second apron here. You have all of those first apron penalties, but you lose that $5 million mid-level exception. You also are not allowed to sign players on the buyout market. You also can't use previously generated trade exceptions or aggregate salaries in a trade. So basically, if you're trading guys, it's got to be 1-to-1 while you're in the second apron. You can also not include cash in a deal, essentially limiting buying second round picks. And you cannot trade a first round pick that's 7 years out. And then here's really the big part of this. A team's first round pick is moved to the end of the first round if you're in the second apron for 2 out of the last 4 seasons after entering in it. That really limits what you could do. You saw this really impacting the Milwaukee Bucks and the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix couldn't get a deal done for Jimmy Butler because they're a second apron team, and it just limited what they were capable of doing. The Milwaukee Bucks, I'll tell you this. They were aggressively trying to trade for Jose Alvarado, but there was just no way to really make a deal work because of the limitations that they have. So it limits what you can do here. So teams are really scared of that, right? And this is only partially, what led the Mavs to trading Luka Doncic. It's still stupid, but basically he qualifies for what's called a supermax, which is 5% more than a max deal. And guys usually get that contract or are eligible for it in years 7 to 9 in the NBA. So on the back end of that, you're in your mid 30s, potentially if it's a 5-year deal, which is what scared him, paying Luka that much money when there were concerns about his body. There you go. There's your tie to Zion. More on that coming up in a second here. I'm getting there. And that's why the rumors about Ja Morant maybe are out there right now. And this came from Howard Beck of the Ringer, one of the Ringer podcasts here. What was it called? Real Ones with Howard Beck. And Howard Beck, I trust. He's been on the show before here, by the way. So he said, and it got taken a little bit out of context, but an executive said out of the blue, apparently, keep an eye on Ja Morant this summer. If Luka Doncic scared us, maybe Ja Morant, who's only 25 years old, might be the next guy to kind of get moved. And it's basically the Memphis Grizzlies trying to get out ahead of that supermax deal that just creates crippling ability to build a competitive team. None of these second apron teams look like they're going to win a title anytime soon or even this season, right? So if that just limits what you're capable of doing, go in a different direction. And I think that's kind of what this is. Now, I think some of these Ja Morant rumors are probably not exactly true, but you've seen teams kind of want to avoid paying the supermax in these max deals and try and get out ahead of it rather than, say, being stuck in a situation like Brandon Ingram. It would have been better to trade him a couple of years ago, right? And one of the things I've long said to y'all, especially for players at his caliber, the best time to trade him is the first year of their deal. Just get out ahead of it. I don't think that's realistic. I don't want to really live in that world of NBA transactions, but you get the point that I'm making. So there you go. Then that's why rival executives think that Ja Morant could be on the move. So to me, I get why other people think that makes sense, even if I wouldn't do it, and that's probably not the approach that the team's going to take. And even the Grizzlies have come out and said the Ja Morant rumors, not true. But what else would they say, even if they were thinking about it, right? So let me put it to you this way. Zion Williamson is on his extension already. He'll be due for another one before you know it at this point in time. He signed a 5-year max deal at the time, not supermax. So he's under contract this year, and then there's 3 more years after this, 2025, 2026, 26, 27, 27, 28. So it's time to get out ahead of it right now, right? Do that. Well, here's the thing. I'm not so sure. And I'll explain why coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip, or you just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets with a same game parlay. I love the same game parlays. There's only one NBA game tonight. It's the Los Angeles Lakers taking on the Charlotte Hornets. LA is favored by 12.5. Give me the minus 12.5. They're going to run away with this one, and give me Luka Doncic at over 25 points. You're going to get a bigger payout if both those things hit. So even if I miss tip-off, I can't get that bet in. With the live betting, you can do it. So even if you miss the beginning of the game, you've never missed your chance to place a bet. So right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. New FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I see. I appreciate it. So, by the way, go check out the newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. You can sign up for the free Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. It's going to be going back out today, now that I'm kind of back into doing the shows and everything and starting to actually feel like a normal human again. Oh boy, it's been a week, y'all. So it's like Wednesday. So Thursday, whatever day this is. And so let's get into the case for Zion Williamson here. If teams are trading Luka Doncic, potentially John Morant, and some of these other guys here, Pelicans should just get out ahead of trading Zion, right? So the answer is yes and no to this. Truthfully, I only find that you need to get out ahead of it if it's guys that are eligible for a max or a supermax deal. And while Zion is on a max deal, there's something called a Rose Rule contract too. And that is only for guys coming off of their rookie contract for their next extension. And basically the criteria to reach that is the same to reach the supermax deal, which is you made All-NBA the year before you signed the extension or 2 out of 3 years before, if you won Defensive Player of the Year or if you've won League MVP, right? That's how you get the supermax deal. So if you consistently make All-NBA, you're basically eligible for it, right? That's what it comes down to, any of the All-NBA teams. So Zion missed All-NBA before he signed it, hence his deal was significantly lower than it would have been otherwise back in 2022 when he signed it. Now that he's in the second year of it, he'll have 3 more years left after this. But let me ask you this. Is Zion going to get a super max deal? Do you see him regularly making All-NBA one of the All-NBA teams? Do you see him winning Defensive Player of the Year? Like, we can rule that out right now. Do you see him winning League MVP? Just based on what we've seen from him. I think the answer to that is no, right? No. I want you to remember what I just said there because it's going to come up in the next segment. He's not doing that. He's not going to be eligible for a supermax, right? Like, that's kind of the way I feel about that, right? I'm like writing a note down to come back to. So, no. Is he going to get a max deal? Is he going to get a max deal after this contract? Do you think he will have played enough, been healthy enough, or shown enough to be deserving of a max contract for his next contract in 2027, 2028? Do we actually definitively know the answer to that right now? And so the answer to me feels like maybe. He's so talented, he can be so good that, yeah, maybe he is max contract worthy. And here's the thing. If he is max contract worthy, I think you give it to him. He's not going to be super max eligible, but max contracts aren't really scaring teams away. Ingram wasn't going to be super max eligible, but he also wasn't a max level talent guy anyway. I think Zion can be. John Morant, I'd give a max deal to. Would I be scared to give him a super max? Maybe not, but you get what I'm saying here. We don't need to worry about that with Zion Williamson. So it's not the same thing as Luka or John Morant right here. So you don't need to worry about that, right? Especially given that he missed that Rose Rule escalator in his, extension eligible stuff earlier, and it cost him, or it left a lot of money on the table here. Zion, if it's like, yeah, you got to give him a max, that's a no-brainer, I think you do it. That's a good thing. That means he's been really good. He's played consistently and hopefully has figured some of the stuff out that he needs to figure out. So if you're someone who wants Zion traded, that's totally valid, and we'll get into that in the next segment here, but I don't think you need to justify it with Ja Morant or Luka Doncic comps right now. And the other thing is, if you do trade him, and then you're conceivably building around Trey Murphy, Herb, maybe Misi is kind of your cornerstone guy, and whoever you draft, there's no guarantee that could work out. I'm a big believer in Trey. Is he the number one option? I'm not quite sure just yet, though he's starting to show it off. We talked about it, even though he won't win Most Improved Player in yesterday's show. But Zion does have that top end talent where you're like, oh yeah, I definitely can see him being the best player on a title winning team. Someone asked when I put out a call for questions on Twitter the other day, would you trade the Pelicans pick this year for Ja Morant? I would absolutely do that, by the way. I think that ties into this discussion. I think, the concerns over giving Ja Morant or other guys big time money deals is overblown in my opinion. And here's the thing. I want to see this team win. And I just want to see him go for it. That's maybe the biggest frustration with current ownership that I have is like, go for it. And to their credit, they kind of have, and it's just never worked out. They went for it with DeMarcus Cousins, then that injury happened. They kind of went for it, even if it was a somewhat safe move, with DeJounte Murray, and then look at the injuries that have just derailed this season. They've never really been in position to be like, full send, foot to the floor, throwing the gas down, and like, we're going to just burn everything and go for it. Requires spending. It's going to be deep into the luxury tax for that. Basically being a first apron team, more or less. You're spending that kind of money there and the restrictions that make it difficult. But I'd like to do that. So if you have, say, the number one overall pick, I'd probably trade that. I think you could convince me. I'm not 100% certain. And we'll maybe discuss this a little bit more in tomorrow's show, where I'm going to give you kind of my first big board of the year, at least top 10 guys, and let's break down some of them because I find that pretty interesting as I've been watching a lot of college basketball recently. So because I think Ja Morant's that good, and I'd say like screw the money, you trade for Ja Morant, you pair him with Zion, you pay everybody, and you try and go for it and win a title. If it doesn't work, you're probably bad for about a decade. But look, it's not my money. It's easy for me to say that when I don't need to deal with the financials and have the penalties and all of those things. So it's something to kind of keep in mind with all of that too. If Zion looked like he was going to be a problem on his next deal, you trade him, right? Let's not go through this. And we'll talk about that next. I just don't think we have the answer to that just yet. And so you likely keep him for another year and then you don't move him. But if you want to trade Zion Williamson, here's why. And it's got something that I said earlier, but also another reason too. And I'll explain what that is. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, Locked On Saints. The coaching staff is coming together here in New Orleans, and I'm pretty hyped. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints got me fired up. Go make that your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I kind of just went over why Zion's not really in a similar situation to Ja Morant, to Luka Doncic, and the reasons why you would move those guys. And look, the Luka trade was stupid. The Luka trade was exceptionally stupid, and they shouldn't have done that anyway. So whatever reasons you use to justify it, it's like, no. Absolutely not. So there's that. But if you want to trade Zion, there's very many valid reasons. You don't need to talk yourself into it or anything like that. The reasons are plainly there. Same thing. Look, if you want Willie Green fired, you don't need to resort to bad arguments about it. You can just be like, it's time. And you go, yeah. Totally. It's one of the things I hate about the MVP discussion of if you've got a guy that you think should be MVP of the league, just lay out your case for him and don't be like, the other dude sucks and the other guy turns it over. Just make your case for your guy and move on. You don't need to resort to bad faith arguments to lift up your guys because it doesn't hurt. You see this in everything, right? Knocking someone else down doesn't actually raise you up or, whatever you're trying to promote up. So why you trade Zion is this, right? It goes back to what I said beginning. Do you see him making All NBA regularly? I don't. Do you see him winning MVP? Not really. He has the talent to, but do you see it actually happening? The answer to me is no. Do you see him winning Defensive Player of the Year? I think we can all agree on that one. That's a no. So if he's not going to be doing those things, it's probably time to move on, right? When you draft a number 1 overall pick, it shouldn't just be a dude who's a good starter. It needs to be someone who's, it doesn't have to be a transcendent player, but it needs to be someone who's pretty good and is making all NBA, right? Is Anthony Edwards going to win MVP? I don't really see that happening necessarily. But does he make All NBA regularly? Yeah. Is he the best player in the league? No. Will he ever be the best player in the league? No. Might he be the face of the league? Yeah, he's got that good mean streak and is a little bit nasty, and I dig that. But there you go, right? You look at some of the other number 1 overall picks, right? Anthony Davis has never won, maybe a bad example, but never won, MVP or Defensive Player of the Year. But regularly makes an All NBA team, is going to lift you up and makes your team better, right? You can look at that with the number 1 overall pick. And that's what you're looking at. And if you do that, that's the most important thing, right? Zion's not, right? Wembanyama's definitely going to be. Paolo Banchero will definitely be kind of in that mix too. Cade Cunningham is having a resurgent year. He's probably going to win Most Improved Player. Anthony Edwards is made All NBA. He'll continue to do it, right? Zion's kind of the guy that hasn't, in a sense. And then you look at some of the other ones, they're okay. Karl Anthony Towns, right? Makes All NBA, not going to win, that kind of stuff. You look at some of those players and you're like, yeah, that works. You don't need to be a transcendent guy regularly here. It's got to be just a little bit more than the All-Star game. And so that's kind of the issue that I've seen with Zion here. He's great for the All-Star game, but do you get better than that? And the answer is kind of no. So if the answer to that is no, you trade him, right? Again, it's a max contract for a guy that makes the All-Star game every now and then. It feels like that's not correct for what you want. The other thing is, look, if you want to trade him, is the team going to be good next year? They're still in a weird financial position. It's better, but they're still in a bit of a weird bind there. And you're not going to have DeJounte Murray to start the year. That is my biggest concern. If you had Murray to start the year, then I go okay, cool. They're going to retool. They'll add, let's call it the 2nd or 3rd pick in the draft. There's some good guys there that really would fit the team and help you immediately, that also have top end talent. That sounds great. I'm on board. Let's do it. But if you're just going to have $30 million in dead weight salary, right, in Murray until he gets better, and then it's going until he gets healthy, and then it's going to take a while. And look, we wish a speedy recovery for him. I want nothing more than for him to be helping this team. But if you're looking at it from just a realistic standpoint here, they're not in a great spot. So yeah, you need to figure that out. And can we go through just another slog of a year? And would it be bad to be we're going to try, and then you end up winning 30 games and you end up with the 10th overall pick versus a top 5 pick again in back-to-back years, and how you could rebuild like that. So part of this also could be, come down to, and I think this is the bigger point, that the lottery day and where this team ends up really will change where the direction that they go around Zion Williamson. If you end up with the number 1 overall pick with Cooper Flagg, maybe you just build around him. And he's going to go number 1 overall. There's no question about that. Spoiler alert for my top 10 tomorrow, top 15, whatever I end up doing. Cooper Flagg's 1. If you end up with the 6th pick, 7th pick, different story. Maybe it's just, it's not someone we feel is going to be a guy that we can build around for the future, a franchise cornerstone. So let's just try and run it back with Zion. But if you get that franchise cornerstone guy, okay, maybe if you get the 2nd pick and you end up with Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey or something like that, that changes your thinking too about how they could fit into the team, right? Dylan Harper looks like he can be, if you need a point guard to start the year because of Murray, while I don't view Dylan Harper as a pure point, could he come off the bench and help you with some of that? Yeah. So does it buy you time until you get DeJounte Murray back? Yeah, that makes some sense. There's one or two guys that seem like they could run an NBA offense to me out there too. So if you end up with the 4th pick, the 5th pick, something like that, and you land them, okay, that does change things a little bit, I think. So there's things to look at with that too. And I think the lottery day could be one of those days that ends up being, it's obviously always important to the New Orleans Pelicans or anyone drafting in there. But when you have potential to be in the top 5, and there's a big difference between, say, 2 and 7 in this draft too. I think you can get really excited about some of the picks in there, some of the players in there, and what you're capable of seeing them do and what they can bring to the team. Give me your top 5 in the draft tonight, or you can wait until the show tomorrow. Give me your top 5. Give me your big board. Go as many as you want. I'm going to give you mine and some reasoning behind it all. I'm excited about it. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'm feeling good. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have some bonus shows as well to make up for missing a couple episodes this week and getting one out late on Wednesday. But I finally felt good enough to record for y'all. I'm going to go wheeze a ton right now and just catch my breath. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for bearing with me this week as I recover here. As always, this is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.